Commission does not tolerate any disruption or outbursts of any kind. Please silence your mobile devices that may sound off during these proceedings. And when speaking before the Commission, if you care to, do state your name for the record. I'd like to take roll at this time. Commission President Fong.
Here.
Commissioner Hillis.
Here.
Commissioner Moore.
Here.
And newly sworn in Commissioner Koppel. Welcome.
Here. Thank you.
We do expect Commissioner Johnson to arrive shortly and Vice President Richards to be absent today. Commissioners, first on your agenda is consideration of items proposed for continuance. Item 1 for case number 2015-003768 DRP-02 at 2462 Filbert Street. Discretionary review is proposed for continuance to September 29, 2016. Item 2 for case number 2015-012722 PCA, Inclusionary Affordable Housing Program Planning Code Amendment, is proposed for continuance to December 15, 2016. Item 3 for case number 2015-006857 CUA at 4529 18th Street, conditional use authorization is proposed for continuance to December 15, 2016. And further, Commissioners, under your regular calendar, item 14 for 854 Cap Street. The address is shown incorrectly on your agenda and therefore needs to be continued. The proposed continuance date is September 29th, and that's for case number 2015-002135 CUA. I have no other items proposed for continuance, and I did have the one speaker card for item 1.
Okay, opening it up for public comment on the items on the continuance calendar. Richard Oppenheimer.
Yes, sir. Good morning. My name is Dick Oppenheimer. I'm one of the 2 discretionary review applicants regarding the remodel of 2462 Filbert Street. The other applicants is Stephanie and Paul Reichley. We are requesting that the Commission reschedule the hearing on the agenda from September 29th to a new date that works for us as well as the sponsor. I would like to briefly provide the context for this review. The matter was originally scheduled for hearing on January 21st. The 21st hearing was taken off the calendar by the project sponsor when we learned the day before the hearing that the project plans submitted to the Planning Department misrepresented that a roof deck was existing when it was not. The new notice date scheduled for a continued hearing was today, September 15th. The sponsors did not comply with the signed notification requirements, so the hearing was again postponed. These delays were entirely of the project sponsor's own making. Because of the importance of the issue, the Reichleys canceled plans to attend a college parents' weekend out of town and to be able to attend the hearing on the 15th. The reason they are not here today is that they rescheduled the college trip and again are out of town. The Planning Department placed the proposed new hearing date of September 29th on today's agenda. Mr. Reichley is chair of the California State Bar Antitrust, UCL, and private section. On September 29th, there has been a meeting scheduled months ago in San Diego, all of the chairs of all of the sections for the State Bar. As chair of the antitrust section, Mr. Reichley is obligated to attend the State Bar meeting in San Diego. We immediately notified the Planning Department of Mr. Reichley's conflict, but the proposed new date of September 29th had already been placed on today's agenda. Mr. Reichley is acting as our counsel. Surely, if the project sponsor can have a counsel, so too can the DR applicant. The planning staff recommended that we contact the sponsor's attorney and negotiate a mutually agreeable new date. We followed the recommendation and offered the sponsor's attorney 6 different Planning Commission meeting dates that we were able to attend: October 27th, November 10th, November 17th, December 1, December 8th, and December 15th. We understand from the staff that December 1 is available, and we request that date. If there are other openings on any of the other dates proposed, that would be fine with us, too.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Your
you.
time is up.
Okay, calling another speaker, Tom Tunney.
Thank you, Commissioners. Tom Tunney, Ruben Junius and Rose on behalf of the property owner. And yes, to summarize, we would like to keep the September 29th date. And to go through some of the background and just clarify, we were scheduled for January 21st. There wasn't a misrepresentation. There was a mistake made by both the property owner and staff about whether the deck was legal or not. We discovered it was not. So out of an abundance of caution, we applied again to legalize the deck, and out of even more caution, issued a new 311 notice just to make sure that all of the neighbors were aware. That resulted in the delay until June, when the 311 notice period ended, and then we were unable to get a hearing date then until 3 months later, September 15th, in part due to the DR requesters' schedules and summer vacations. Now, we acknowledge that this requirement of at least 2 more weeks is our own doing. We posted the poster a day late. It was due on Labor Day, the 5th, and we posted it the next day. Again, out of caution and working with staff, we agreed to a 2-week continuance to September 29th, just to make sure that there were absolutely no questions about whether the public in the neighborhood had notice. And now we're faced with potentially 6 weeks or more of delay, and we could not agree to that with the DR requesters, and we ask that the Commission maintain the date of the 29th. I would note that Mr. Riley has stated that he is counsel for his wife. They are both, as a household, the DR requesters. We've been told, Ms. Riley has told us that she can attend. We think she can ably represent their interests at the hearing on the 29th. So we don't think there would be any bias or impartiality there. We have our own support, 20 letters of support from the neighborhood that would like this hearing to go forward on the 29th. And finally, I would just point out that this is an abbreviated discretionary review under the Planning Commission's own proposed reforms. This wouldn't even be coming to the Commission for consideration. We think that it can be capably and ably discussed on the 29th. And thank you for your consideration.
Okay, thank you. Is there any additional public comment on the items proposed for continuance? Okay, not seeing any public comment is closed. And Commissioner Moore.
Move to continue items 2, 3, and item 14 as noted by Secretary Ionen. And I would ask the rest of the Commission to comment on the presentation on Filbert. I'm prepared to move it off to December 1st, but would like to see comment from other commissioners before I do.
Commissioners, I would only add that since the advice of the planner, December 1st is now closed to additional DRs, as there are 4 DRs scheduled for the 1st. The next available DR hearing date would be the 8th. There is also the possibility of squeezing it on the 17th, as there are only 2 DRs currently scheduled for the 17th.
17th of what?
November 17th.
Okay. Commissioner Hillis.
I mean, on item 1, I'm open to continuance. I mean, we get in this kind of back and forth about calendars. I mean, it would be great if we can do it sometime in October. It has been, remember this item back in January, it's been kicking around. It doesn't preclude the project sponsor and the DR requesters from getting together and trying to hopefully work this out. Is there any time earlier, Secretary Ionen?
If you'd like,
I mean, there was that October date that was proposed.
we could add it to October 6th as well.
I propose that.
I prefer
to try.
that as well. Yeah.
So if that's, you made a motion already, Commissioner Moore, but if
I'm prepared to support October 6th, assuming that that date is workable. I would agree with Commissioner Hillis that we should not be dragged into what really is a negotiation between people appearing in front of this commission. We are not the moral police in any form or shape. Whatever you say, we have to look at it objectively with no bias to anybody. That is the nature of the DR. So October 6th
Second, and I'll second
would
that.
be the date that we would be proposing putting it on the calendar.
Very good, Commissioners, thank you. Shall I call that question then?
Yes, please.
On that motion then to continue items 2, 3, and 14 as proposed, and item 1 to October 6th, Commissioner Hillis,
Aye.
Commissioner Koppel,
Aye.
Commissioner Moore,
Aye.
Commissioner, and Commission President Fong.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 4-0. And places us under your consent calendar. All matters listed here under constitute a consent calendar are considered to be routine by the Planning Commission and may be acted upon by a single roll call vote of the Commission. There will be no separate discussion of this item unless a member of the Commission, the public, or staff so requests, in which event the matter shall be removed from the consent calendar and considered as a separate item at this or a future hearing. Item 4 for case number 2016-005143 CUA at 1331 through 1335 Polk Street, conditional use authorization.
Is there any public comment on the item proposed on the consent calendar? Not seeing any public comment is closed. Commissioner Moore?
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioners. On that motion then to approve item 4 under consent, Commissioner Hillis,
Aye.
Commissioner Koppel,
Aye.
Commissioner Moore,
Aye.
and Commission President Fong.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 4-0. And places on us on under Commission matters, item 5, Commission comments and questions.
Commissioner Moore?
If I may jump ahead of the President, I'd like to welcome our new Commissioner Koppel. Nobody has acknowledged that he sits here. Welcome to the gang.
Thank you.
I'll extend that welcome, and you know this procedure as well as us, and have spent many times on that side. So happy to have your expertise and your different opinions and thoughts. And this is, as you know, a very interesting and mixed and eclectic commission, and I think you'll do a great job adding another perspective to that. So welcome, Commissioner Koppel.
Thank you all for the good welcome. I'd like to first start off by giving some respect to former Commissioners Wu and Antonini for their years of service. I'd also like to start off by thanking Mayor Edley for the nomination, the Board of Supervisors for their support, and President London Breed for the direction also. Really honored and privileged to be up here, and I'm not taking the seat lightly, and am just thrilled to be a part of the conversation. Thanks.
Fantastic. Welcome again.
Okay, if there's nothing further, we can move on to department matters. Item 6, Director's announcements.
Other than to also gratefully welcome Commissioner Koppel to the Commission, I have no director's announcements.
Item 7, review of past events at the Board of Supervisors, Board of Appeals. There was no Historic Preservation Commission hearing yesterday.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Aaron Starr, Planning Department staff. At Monday's land use hearing, the committee heard a proposed extension of the interim prohibition on commercial mergers in the proposed Calle 24 Special Use District. The urgency ordinance proposes extending the existing interim prohibition on commercial storefront mergers of greater than 799 gross square feet in the proposed SUD for an additional 12 months. The proposed Calle 24 SUD generally includes properties bound by 22nd Street to the north, Petro Avenue to the east, Cesar Chavez to the south, and Cap Street to the west. The Land Use Committee hearing, there was no public testimony with no substantive discussion. The committee then voted to unanimously recommend the item to the full board. Also at the Land Use Committee, the department's preservation staff took part in a hearing on the status of the LGBTQ Cultural Heritage District, first proposed in 2011 as part of the Western Soma community planning effort. Department staff conveyed the importance of creating a citywide strategy rather than one tied to a specific geography, like the Castro Soma or the Tenderloin. Staff discussed the need to identify members of the public as stakeholders to participate in the community-led effort, and also said that some progress has been made on that front. Staff also testified that the budget will require additional department staff to be sought in the fiscal year 2016-17 budget. Members of the public, largely representing the LGBTQ nightlife community, urge the community to accelerate the process of creating a working group to lead the development of the Cultural Heritage District. On Tuesday, Supervisor Wiener introduced a resolution urging the establishment of the LGBTQ Nightlife Working Group, and also urged the Office of Economic and Workforce Development and the Entertainment Commission to convene the working group with the goal of protecting, preserving, and expanding LGBTQ nightlife, including drafting and enacting a plan to create a citywide cultural heritage strategy. At the full board hearing this Tuesday, the board heard the appeal of the conditional use authorization and the environmental determination for 2000 Bryant Street. On June 2nd of this year, the Planning Commission approved the project that consists of demolishing 6 buildings, including 3 dwelling units, and the construction of a 6-story mixed-use building with 196 market rate dwelling units. 3 on-site below market rate units, approximately 12,000 square feet of PDR space, and 84 parking spaces. The project provides open space through a roof deck, 2 inner courtyards, and a mid-block alley. The project meets its inclusionary affordable housing requirements by dedicating land to the city, which is capable of containing 89 dwelling units. Since the Commission's approval, the project has been modified by reducing the number of market rate dwelling units from 196 to 191, increasing the number of car share parking spaces from 2 to 5, subsidizing rent for 4,000 square feet of PDR, and an agreement to pay for tenant improvements related to the 12,000 square feet of PDR use. The board hearing lasted approximately 5 hours. Appellants claimed that the CEQA review was faulty because the community plan exemption relied upon the Eastern Neighborhoods EIR, and the EIR was out of date. Planning staff explained that the program EIRs do not establish caps or limits on development, but rather report the growth projections used to inform the impact analysis. Differences between projections and the actual growth do not render an EIR inadequate. Staff also explained that CEQA mandates streamlined review through the use of CPEs to avoid unnecessary paperwork for projects consistent with the development density assumed by the adopted community plans. The appellants also argued that the CPE was inadequate because it did not identify significant impacts from gentrification. As the city attorney and staff explained, economic or social impacts are not significant effects on the environment. Regarding the CU authorization, the appellants claim that the Commission did not make the appropriate findings for the CU, that open space was not sufficient, and that the land dedication did not meet code requirements. Planning staff reminded the board that the CU concerned only the loss of 3 dwelling units. The remainder of the project's attributes were part of the large project authorization, which is subject to an appeal that was considered on Wednesday night by the Board of Appeals. Further, the Planning Commission found that the project was consistent with the urban mixed-use zoning district, meeting open space requirements through a roof terrace and the inclusionary requirements through adequate land dedication. MOHCD has certified that the land dedication would not only meet, but also exceed the code requirements for affordable housing. District Supervisor Campos said that the project had been greatly improved due to community organizing. For him, the question at the heart of the appeal was, does this project do enough for the community? He felt that on balance, the community would be better off if this project was approved rather than being denied. After discussions, the board unanimously upheld the CPE and the Commission's conditional use authorization. Also at the full board was the approval of the proposed Calle 24 Special Use District interim controls, and of course the confirmation of Myrna Melgar and Joe Koppel to the Planning Commission. The new introductions have not been posted online yet, so I don't know what those are, but we do know that Supervisor Wiener, as I said, introduced a resolution urging the establishment of the LGBTQ Nightlife Working Group. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, as alluded to,
Sir, Commissioners, my apologies. One more item that I wanted to bring up and really should have been under Commissioner comments, and that I wanted to share a conversation that has been taking place over a number of weeks, months, and Commissioner Moore has brought it up several times, and that is the occasion when we have these meetings, super meetings that go to midnight. Commissioner Koppel, we're getting off very easy today with a light load, so part of your welcome. But to try to level those out and not have those mega meetings and then short ones like this. So in part of that attempt, and as you see, even when we look at the forward calendar, finding an open spot or an open date is difficult. I wanted to share with you a couple of ideas and thoughts that Commissioner Johnson and Commissioner Richards, as well as Commissioner Moore, have shared with me individually that we may or may not want to try out and do a little bit of a pilot. One of them may be actually starting the meetings earlier, starting them at 10 a.m. We wouldn't. That may be a professional conflict for some, but it would, in those super days, get us out earlier. Or when we predict there's going to be a super day, that we can start earlier. The other thought is to actually compile the DRs to 1 day a month or 2 days a month, however it works out, so we can really focus on that fine-grained detail, maybe bring in other experts for opinions related to just DRs and residential buildings. And the third one was potentially, especially when there are high-impacted calendars, actually to reduce the minutes on the public comment. Now, that's not generally a well-received thought, but the DR comments could be reduced to 1 minute and CU comments reduced to 2 minutes. So essentially dropping a minute each would actually save quite a bit. And again, all of these three could be only imparted on special heavy calendar days. And so Jonas and staff did a little bit of research on other commissions. It is typical that 2 or 3 minutes is used, and in some occasions 1 minute is used. So we would not be out of the norm by changing that or adopting that. And again, that is at the discretion of whoever's sitting in this seat as the president. Again, could be the standard rule, the default, or in special circumstances applied. So I just want to throw that out. Obviously, we're down a few commissioners today. Want to let them hear this, but I wanted to share that conversation with you.
Okay, Commissioners, coming back to item 7, the zoning administrator requested that I report to you regarding the Board of Appeals action yesterday. As alluded to by Mr. Starr, there was one item on appeal that you had heard previously at 2000 Bryan Street, the large project authorization. The board unanimously denied the appeal and upheld the Commission's decision. Moving on then, Commissioners, to general public comment, not to exceed a period of 15 minutes. At this time, members of the public may address the Commission on items of interest to the public that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Commission except agenda items. With respect to agenda items, your opportunity to address the Commission will be afforded when the item is reached in the meeting. Each member of the public may address the Commission for up to 3 minutes. I do have one speaker card.
Georgia Shudish, please.
Good afternoon. Welcome. Good luck. Have fun. I think you need more ability to monitor alterations by requiring project sponsors to send photos of the demo work as the project proceeds to make sure it's not a demo or tantamount to a demolition. I think next week you're dealing with the 317 informational, and it's a suggestion that should be considered, I think, as you deal with that. The new demo calcs are very good, but they're only in the packet. They're not on the 311 plans, so that's another thing to consider. I raised that issue last week with Grandview, and when you took DR and you didn't consider it, but that's fine. I understand that. That's a problem. But I was glad that you added a unit. I thought that was a very positive thing. Enforcement. People often say, oh, Mrs. Shudish, why don't you file a complaint? Well, I think enforcement after the fact is very hard. It's much easier to do before the issues arise, whether it's determining the current or existing number of units in a project that's going under an alteration, or closing the loophole like in Section 317B7. I think if you talk to the staff, at least what I've seen, it's really hard. They work very hard, and if a complaint is filed, it's an arduous task for the staff to deal with an uncertain outcome. I think the ultimate goal is to preserve as much existing housing as possible. That's kind of what the whole 317 thing is about. And in that same vein, you, and the staff, the public, we need to proceed with the residential design guidelines. They're critical and necessary for the R-zone districts, all our neighborhoods that comprise the most part of our city. The bulk of our city is residential neighborhoods. They need to be upgraded and modernized and publicly aired per my general comments, public comments that I made in the minutes on June 23rd, 2016. I think that it's according to that memo from last January, the staff is working or plans to work with the AIA. I think they need to be brought up now with the public. I think it's been 2 years. I think I had a paper somewhere that said you started working on them 2 years ago. So I really would be good. I think they're a really important thing, particularly if you talk about DRs and combining DR hearings. So that's my comments today. Thanks a lot. Welcome again. And here's for the minutes, Mr. Ionin. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Is there any other additional general public comment? Okay, public comment is closed.
Commissioners, that will place us under your regular calendar on item 8 for case number 2016-010605 PCA, the Better Roofs Ordinance Planning Code Amendment.
Good afternoon, President. Oh, is this on? Good afternoon, President Fong and members of the Commission. Ann Brask, Planning Department staff. The item before you is a proposed ordinance amending the Planning Code to establish standards for new building construction, facilitating development of renewable energy facilities and living roofs. Supervisor Wiener's office has been a great leader in pushing the sustainability of our city, and I'd like to invite Andres Powers from the Supervisor's office to talk about the ordinance.
Good afternoon, President Fong, commissioners, and welcome, Commissioner Koppel. Andres Power here with Supervisor Scott Wiener's office. Today before you is what at least I think, and hopefully you all think, is exciting legislation to support the greening of rooftops here in San Francisco. This proposal today builds off of an ordinance that the supervisor authored earlier this year, requiring that most new buildings here in the city have solar power or solar heating installed on at least 15% of their rooftop area. That legislation has now been passed and has been signed by the mayor. That legislation made us the first large city in the country to require solar rooftops in most construction. There's been strong interest in this ordinance across the country, and hopefully this will spur others to follow suit. And that really was, and today's legislation will continue to be a significant step forward in making our city a cleaner and greener place, and ultimately more sustainable in this era of climate change. Today's legislation is the second piece, as I've mentioned, of the rooftop ordinance, what we're collectively calling and what staff have been calling the Better Roofs Ordinance. It proposes to expand the ordinance to include green roofs in the solar requirement, and that green roofs can be an alternate compliance typology for that 15% rooftop area, but that specifically that it would come at a 2-to-1 ratio. So whatever square foot of solar you don't install, you'd have to install 2 square feet of green rooftop, and that was just based on mathematical calculations of cost. The idea being that we wanted it, as long as the cost was the same to the project sponsor, that it seemed like a fair trade-off, given that both are important policy priorities to advance. So with this amendment today, the most new rooftops would have at least 15% of their rooftop area being solar, or as much as 30% of the rooftop area being green roofs if they choose to only do green roof. I think a much more likely scenario would be a combination of the two, given shading issues and other constraints. Just briefly, and as the staff report already articulates, green roofs have a variety of documented health and environmental benefits, including reducing the quantity of stormwater runoff into the combined sewer system, and then also the quality of that runoff is enhanced given the filtration that happens with green roof membranes and the substrate. Reduces the heat island effect that many of our cities share, although San Francisco perhaps to a lesser extent. Helps with energy efficiency in the buildings, improves air quality, acts as a noise attenuator, provides habitat and places for increased biodiversity in our city, and also extends the life of roofs as well. So just in closing, I think for us, a greener city is a more sustainable city. And as rooftops really are one of our last untapped resources in this built-out environment, starting to focus our attention on making sure that our rooftops are more than just a place for pipes and vents and such makes a lot of sense. So I really want to thank Jeff Jocelyn and Ann Brask from your staff for the great work on this proposal that's before you today, and also Barry Hooper from the Department of the Environment and various staff from both DBI and the PUC who have been really key in helping us develop this proposal. Thank you.
I'd also like to acknowledge the team at the Planning Department, Jeff Joslin, Kay Chang, Andrew Perry, and Kirby Olson. We all worked really hard, especially with Barry Hooper and our colleagues at the Department for the Environment. I'm just going to back up a little bit and talk about what a green roof is, for those of you that don't know. A living roof and green roof and vegetated roof are all commonly interchanged terms. We've started using living roof here as we know that San Francisco doesn't see as much rain, so we understand those plants might not be green year-round. But it's where the substrate or media and other living roof components are on the exterior membrane of the roof. The overall goals of this ordinance were really to work with our colleagues at Department for the Environment and Public Utilities Commission to really promote interagency collaboration, as well as facilitating the highest and best use of space, and to allow for flexibility for the designer, the developer, and owner. As Andres mentioned, since 2014, the California State Building Code has required 15% of the roof area to be solar ready. So that means free and clear of any obstructions or shading. In April of this year, the Board of Supervisors unanimously passed a vote that 15% of the roof area will actually have to have solar installed. The ordinance proposed today before you is an alternative that would allow for that solar to be replaced with living roof at a 2-to-1 ratio. So somewhere between that 15 and 30% would have solar, living roof, or a combination of both. Our team at the Planning Department has been at this for a while. In 2013, we co-hosted the Cities Alive conference. It's a national green roof conference with our colleagues at the PUC. In preparation for the conference, Spur organized a task force of other city agency colleagues and outside designers. And out of that came the Greener and Better Roofs Roadmap, which includes recommendations, including a mandate and also a living roof manual. After the conference, our team got a lot of momentum and started to look at what other cities were doing and why San Francisco falls so far behind in total square footage of green roofs. We found that certain cities have incentives or grants. Chicago, for example, had a requirement that required all new municipal buildings to have green roofs. We looked closer at our plans and policies and noticed that a lot of our projects do bring up green roofs, but no specific project really dove into what that means for San Francisco and how that impacts our environment. After the conference, we started to get a lot of calls from the public, and people asked, how can we get a green roof? What does that mean? Does that require notification? So we decided to culminate all that information we'd gained and put it on our website. We also looked around at what living roofs were out there right now. So we have a map on our website also that has existing and proposed. The data out there is a little tough so far, so in the future we plan to have a box on our permit tracking site so we can easily track those in the future. We also linked up with the Department for the Environment's SF Plant Finder. Right now you can type in your address and you can bring up any plant that you should plant in your specific area. So we filtered out roof plants. As we know, roofs are really difficult environments for plants. They're really windy. You might have to have a shallow root system. So having that filter could really benefit owners and designers in the future. We got a lot of this information from going out on the field and visiting a lot of these existing green roofs. We all know that Calicat is a great example of a living roof in our city, and we went and talked to these designers and learned what the motivation was for each project. This one in particular has a huge research and education component. One South Van Ness has a rainwater catchment where they use the water from that building in the upper left and drain it into a cistern that irrigates the rooftop. STEM Kitchen and Garden is a great example of urban agriculture in Mission Bay. They actually use all that food that's grown on the roof in their restaurant, STEM. All of this information we took and put into a living roof manual. It's now on our website with a large help from Kirby Olson, one of our past interns. The manual contains a lot of this background information. What are the benefits? What are the structural concerns? As well as design guidelines, which are recommendations for living roofs specific to San Francisco. It also includes a flow chart for anyone interested, owners and the public, on what steps you need to take once you decide you would like a living roof. An example of code requirements after speaking with DBI and fire about what their restrictions are for rooftops. We also worked really hard with PUC to come up with how living roofs and the rainwater harvesting can combine into a system. We know that stormwater management is a really important aspect in our city, so working close with them as a partner was really significant in this process. Our consultants at Arup did a cost-benefit analysis for living roofs and found that over a 25-year period, living roofs are cost-effective for the owner, occupier, and tenant. And this is in large part due to the stormwater management benefit that they receive. So our interagency collaboration was really one of the huge parts that we worked closely with everyone in different agencies to understand what our different rooftop priorities are and to balance all of these. To date, the department has received no public comment, and the department recommends the commission recommend approval to the proposed ordinance and adopt the resolution to that effect. The department strongly supports the Better Roofs requirement and living roof alternative as a way to enhance the utility of rooftops in our city. San Francisco is known for its innovative stewardship and strong reputation for being a green, healthy, and sustainable city. As I've mentioned, planning has been at the forefront of living roof research specific to San Francisco for the last few years, and will continue to update and track new technologies and rooftops. By providing options for a better roof, the designer, developer, or owner is not forced into one use that might not be appropriate for its design and site. And as we know, in a dense urban environment, the roofs become a very valuable resource for land use opportunities and sustainable technology. The proposed ordinance is a great place to start in thinking about how rooftops can provide more for our neighborhoods. This concludes staff's presentation. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Okay, opening up to public comment.
Hi, I think it's a really good idea, and I don't have any problem with it, but what I do have a problem with is ignoring what's happening in our rear yard spaces now. And that's why I think that the whole issue of rear yards have to be considered as part of residential design guidelines. The trend I'm seeing in Noe Valley is people are flat-lotting their yards. They're cutting out trees. They're cementing over the yards. They're creating the W Hotel in their 25 by 114 lot with patios and benches and fake grass, which, you know, I can understand the problem with the water, but if you had earth, it goes into the earth. It charges the water table, which I think some of this water we're mixing with Hetch Hetchy water or groundwater. It doesn't go into the storm drain. So this is really great, but I think you don't want to do this and ignore the other thing. It's like you don't want to add units but yet take away units. It's the same thing. It's like you have something now that's really good. So I really hope that this passes, but I also hope that we will start to really consider the residential design guidelines and what goes on in our rear yards, because our rear yards are part of our mid-block open space. They add to our environment. They add to the value of the homes in the neighborhood as well, and they're critically important, and it would be a shame to see them go because we're not looking at people extending the square footage of their house into the rear yard and using that as they remodel and or do new building. A lot of them must remodel, but you know I all think that they're all demos anyway. So I just think that that needs to be considered or thought about as you proceed with the residential design guidelines. I know you can't do it with this. It would be nice if there was some mention of it, but we have this resource already, and it's a shame if we let it go and then we start putting things on our roofs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any additional public comment? Okay, not seeing any public comments closed. Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you. And thank you, Georgia, for finding a way to turn this issue into one about Noe Valley. No, that was good. No, it is. No, that was great. And actually, my question, this is fantastic work. For those who've seen some of the things I've set up in this area, I love the idea of green roofs, living roofs, gray water, all of the above. So I'm very excited to see this. I just have one question, and it actually kind of follows off of what Ms. Shudish was mentioning, and it's about rear yard. So in the ordinance, in the plan legislation, it says that the percentage that you could use, either 15% for living roof, or I guess now, or 30% for living roof, or 15% for solar, is exclusive of vehicular access space, skylights, and one other one, and heliports. I don't know how many of those we have around the city. I know we have at least a few. And my question is, we often see buildings using roof space for open space because they need a rear yard or an open space variance, or an exposure variance. And so my question is there any possibility, or like what would be the impact of saying that the percentage could come out of space also exclusive of open space, right? Because if you think of all of the roof space, including decks and rooftops on different elevations of building. If there's a building that might have basically two different roof levels, if they're doing the calculation of how much of that space is going to be open space, meaning people can go through it, I would hate to see up to 30% of that become a living roof in the style of a garden or other space that you couldn't actually recreate or do anything in, right? So actually, STEM restaurant, fantastic food. I live in Mission Bay. I go there. It's really good. But you can't walk through their garden, right? And there's other living roofs where it's similar. So my question is, was that considered, or is that something that we could potentially recommend to the supervisors in the future for this?
I'll let planning answer your specific question, but I would just say that you could also design the living roofs in a way that they can be part of the open space aspect, and so it goes both ways. So, a living roof can be, people exclusive. A living roof could also be inclusive, and I was planning helped me get a tour of a living roof at the Whole Foods building on Market and Dolores. And that's an excellent example of a space where the living roof aspect was combined into the open space that project provides.
Yeah. I think what I'm more concerned about, and I'll let planning come up and respond as well, is I agree with you, but I think you're then putting pressure on the department and the planning commission to be on the lookout for that, right? So now we may get a large project authorization, and that's kind of where we're going to be really paying attention to this, because it's a lot of roof space and a lot of open space potentially that the roof has to accommodate. And now we have to be on the lookout for, is your living roof or green space designed in a way that it's part of the recreational space, or is it not? Or is it just sort of the garden over there that in reality you're not going to be able to walk through? And so now you're putting that pressure on us to be looking for that. So I'm just sort of trying to make everyone's life easier. And maybe it's not, right? Maybe that's not the issue. So planning.
Yeah, no, I totally understand your concern. And I think that was part of the reason that it is only 30% of the rooftop, and this is for buildings under 10 stories. So we're thinking that they probably buildings we've seen don't have a lot of other things that are taking up that rooftop space. They should be able to accommodate each of these uses, whether it's a living roof that people can walk on and partially they can't. The other thing I'd like to remember is that it is an alternative compliance. So it's really a choice. If they can't accommodate the living roof, they can go back to their 15% of solar, and that might be the easiest route. But that is something that the planner will implement and work with the client, work with the applicant on.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's fair. I think I'm happy to see just what projects take advantage of it, and we'll see.
Commissioner Moore.
I appreciate the thoughtfulness that went into your study, including all the expertise that you pulled together. I have a couple of questions. One deals with size of projects. 1 to 10-story buildings tend to be relatively small relative to the cost of technology it requires to build a functioning living roof, which only occupies 20% of what is required for solar in lieu of 10%. The question I have is, when you have a project like the Academy of Science and when the Pianos piece, that obviously shines because of its size, its location, partially because it is an environment which has ambient humidity to keep plants looking green and thriving, what in a way aesthetically is the intent of wanting green roofs. My really serious question is about sustainability. Has sustainability of green roofs in a climate like San Francisco, particular neighborhoods where there is no rain or where there is more sun than rain, been examined relative to the sustainability quotient of solar panels? The returning of rainwater to the system when it doesn't rain is a nice intent. However, solar produces solar when it produces solar. I want to know the effectiveness of the sustainability of the two systems when they're compared.
So the effectiveness of solar versus living roof, is that
That's
correct? I think they're kind of apples and oranges for my understanding of it. I mean, I think that it depends on the building and depends on the site. I think living roofs provide a lot of other benefits, from biophilia to real estate benefits of when you're in that building, you are proven to be more productive and happier and will stay at work longer, as well as kind of being around nature and increasing mood, to real estate cost benefits for each project. We've also seen that solar being on top of living roof increases the efficiency of solar panels because it's lowering the temperature of the solar panel beneath it and the roof. So I think it depends on the site, but...
I think you're making some good qualifying statements. It depends on the site, and since we don't measure happiness yet in any form or shape, I think the intent is good. If I really need to look at how sustainable and green the city is, as much as I don't like the visual effects of some solar installations, solar is a higher net producer of sustainability than green roofs are. But I just want to let that sit there and hope that you'll dive more deeply into what ultimately is of higher sustainability. I think that would be an important question to answer.
The other thing I'd add to Anne's comments is that the
Maybe your mic. Thanks.
Thought it was on, sorry. The other thing I would add to Anne's comments is that the Arup study was designed on the back of much prior research by Arup for other institutions and municipalities around the world. And part of their part of their analysis that included acknowledging maintenance costs over time is also embedded in that analysis.
It would be interesting for us to perhaps catch a glimpse of that study. I would be personally interested in seeing it. I just want to make sure that as a city accounts for measurable sustainability in comparison to other cities, that we are taking into consideration that the absence of rain, this is an arid climate, does not really produce as much return of water to groundwater replenishing than we may think it does.
Commissioner Hillis.
So I appreciate this legislation, and especially the fact that you're giving folks, I mean, I think people here had some questions about which is better, but it's giving the developer or property owner the ability to do either and not kind of trying to solve every problem on every roof, which I think is helpful. So I'm supportive and would move to approve or recommend approval. I have one question on the comparisons with other cities. I mean, DC, which is a comparable size and somewhat comparable in density and built environment, has so much more green roofs than we do. I know they have an incentive program, but what else kind of justifies that difference? And is that just green roofs, or is that green roofs and solar installation also?
Yeah, that one is only green roofs, and I believe the incentive is a huge part of it, as well as the stormwater fee. So San Francisco right now doesn't have a stormwater fee, and that's where you are charged if it hits the ground, if you don't capture all the rainwater that's on your site. So that was a huge thing across cities that we saw that San Francisco is lacking. So we've been working closely with colleagues at PUC about enhancing the stormwater fee too.
Right. Okay. And do you know on the solar panel installation how we fare compared to the kind of same cohort of cities or others?
Don't. I would invite my colleague from SFE if they have, or from the Department of the Environment if they do, but I'm not sure. Oh, Barry Hooper might.
Good afternoon. Barry Hooper with the Department of Environment. San Francisco would be in the upper end in terms of installed solar on rooftops, but not the top.
Could you speak into the microphone?
Sorry.
You're hard to hear.
I don't we haven't recently done a very specific comparison that was requested, but basically there is a more than 6,500 photovoltaic systems installed and connected to the grid in San Francisco today, and it would be in the upper end of the distribution among the cities that we're being compared to in terms of green roofs.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Koppel.
Yeah, I again in support of the item. Glad to see that DBI and the fire department were involved. There's still going to be mechanical and electrical equipment on these roofs, and clearances are necessary for the safety of potentially electricity producing devices such as photovoltaic panels. I think it's a good discussion to be a part of because what we're seeing now is not necessarily needing to cover a roof with solar panels. We're designing more energy efficient buildings in the first place that are utilizing more natural light and non-electricity using devices. So it's going to be probably a combination of living roof and solar that could be the perfect sweet spot, for a roof. But rooftops are definitely have a potential for use. A lot of times they're underutilized. So it's good to see this moving forward.
Commissioners, I did hear a motion. Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. On that motion, then, Commissioners, to adopt a recommendation for approval, Commissioner Hillis.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Koppel.
Aye.
Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
And Commission President Fong.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. The motion passes unanimously 5-0. Commissioners, that'll place us on items 9 and 10 that we'll call up together. For case numbers 2016-006227 PCA and 2016-008022 PCA. These are both sign regulations. One is also pertaining to general advertising sign penalties. These are planning code and zoning map amendments.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Diego Sanchez with Planning Department staff. Today I'll be presenting two ordinances proposing to modify the Planning Code sign controls. However, before I begin, I'd like to provide Lee Hepner of Supervisor Peskin's office with time to present to you.
Thank you, Diego. Thank you, President Fong. Commissioners, welcome, Commissioner Koppel. Two ordinances before you today. I just want to provide some of the historical context about what we're doing here and Supervisor Peskin's past work in this area. In 2002, Supervisor Peskin authored Proposition G, and that was an urban and neighborhood beautification ordinance that prohibited any new general advertising signs, which we commonly refer to as billboards. At that time, there were approximately 1,500 or so existing general advertising signs in the city. While no new general advertising signs would be permitted under Prop G, the provision did allow for the relocation of existing legal billboards to new locations, provided that those locations allowed for GA signs prior to Prop G's passing. The Prop G ban on all new GA signs passed with an overwhelming 80% of the vote. In 2007, we took the next step to address the ongoing and creeping commercialization of public spaces in the city. Supervisor Peskin sponsored Proposition K to the ballot, and that was a policy statement declaring the proliferation of advertising signs in the public right-of-way as contributors to urban blight and visual clutter. This item passed with nearly 2/3 of the vote and led to enhanced penalties for parties responsible for posting new illegal general advertising signs. Since 2007, however, new billboards have not ceased to proliferate, in part due to new technologies which allow for these signs to be even projected on any surface. As of mid-2012, code enforcers had successfully removed a total of 733 illegal billboards throughout the city. And since the new penalties went into place about a decade ago, the city has engaged in enforcement actions and litigation against 200 new illegal billboards and successfully removed those. I first want to address item number 10 on your agenda. Excuse me for going slightly out of order. It's board file number 160553, which makes two fundamental changes to Article 6 of the Planning Code. First, it clarifies that all non-commercial signs are exempt from regulation. This is a legal constitutional matter, simply clarifies that we're not allowed to regulate non-commercial speech in the same manner that we're allowed to regulate commercial speech. So this would include religious symbols, informational plaques, non-commercial flags, art murals. Those we are not regulating with this ordinance. Second, and more critically, it enhances the penalties for violations of existing general advertisement sign requirements. So it shortens the window from 30 days to 3 days, or 5 days if the notice of violation is sent by mail, in which a responsible party must file for a permit application to remove the GA sign, or correct the violation, or request reconsideration of the violation. So the responsible party has 3 opportunities to address a notice of violation within a 3 or 5 day window, depending on how that notice is served. In addition, repeat violations of general advertising sign regulations would be subject to enhanced daily penalties, which would range from a multiple to 2 to 5 times the base penalties for the violation. And those would enhance day to day until the violation is abated. For repeat violations, there would be an alternative penalty calculation based on a calculation relative to the profits that are earned off of the general advertisement sign. This legislation is in line with our city's general advertisement plan, which states that, quote, signs are another leading cause of street clutter. Where signs are large, garish, and clashing, they lose their value as identification or advertising and merely offend the viewer. Often these signs are overhanging or otherwise unrelated to the physical qualities of the buildings on which they are placed, end quote. Just some additional context, nationally, revenue from these general advertising signs rose 4.6% in the past year compared to the previous year, and accounting for $7.3 billion in revenue generation. So we know that these are extraordinarily valuable, and it is our office's belief, and the consultation of various other people and stakeholders, that the current penalties have been internalized as a cost of doing business and are no longer a deterrent to unlawful behavior. So we're hoping to change that, to give the city the tools it needs to efficiently remove new illegal general advertisement signs, particularly signs that go up and are relevant for such a short duration that a 30-day window to abate the violation is inconsequential and irrelevant to the entity posting the sign. And with that information, I respectfully ask that this commission adopt planning staff's recommendation of approval of this legislation, and I will defer to you on your preference whether I should just jump into the other ordinance or whether you want to discuss this item first.
I think both probably would be great. Yeah.
Sure. Turning to item number 9 on the agenda, that's board file 160424. This ordinance would essentially limit the relocation restrictions for general advertisement signs, again related to billboards in our city. I already mentioned 2002's Proposition G allowed for the relocation of general advertisement signs, where the land use controls would have allowed for those signs to exist prior to the passage of Prop G. In 2006, the board amended the administrative code to establish new procedures for that relocation, giving rise to the planning department's general advertising sign program, which, among other improvements, allowed for the planning department to better catalog and inventory existing general advertisement signs and to facilitate relocation of those signs. Since we began accepting relocation applications for those signs in 2012, the city has only received 2 requests for relocation of general advertising signs. So we know that relocation is not a high priority as we thought it might have been in 2002. We know that it has not been a high priority for existing legal billboards. The most significant change proposed in this ordinance, among a lot of more minor technical changes, is that general advertising signs would no longer be allowed in C, M, and PDR districts where they are currently allowed today. Additionally, roof signs would no longer be allowed in M and PDR districts. Window signs would be permitted in C, M, and PDR districts where they are prohibited today, as long as they do not exceed 1/3 of the area of the window or clear door on which they are located. So, in effect, we are loosening the restriction on window signs, but placing new restrictions on roof signs and general advertising signs. There are a number of other minor changes, again, including improvements to the definitions of historic and vintage signs. Planning staff, thank you, Diego, made some recommendations to that effect, which we are in full agreement with. Ultimately, the thrust of item 9 on your agenda is to further restrict the relocation of existing general advertising signs, which is in line with what we've seen with respect to how many applications we've seen, which is 2 in the past several years. And again, having reviewed planning staff's recommendations with respect to this ordinance, we are in full agreement. And I want to thank planning staff for providing these additional suggestions, which we believe only improve the ordinance. I also want to thank Tom Radulovich, Jeremy Pollock, Chicken John, and who have provided great advice on these items. So thank you very much.
Commissioners, the department is in overall support of both ordinances and the major changes they make, including aligning the city's controls with the First Amendment's protection on non-commercial speech, strengthening the GA sign controls, and improving and updating other sign controls, including the planning code organization. Commissioners, these changes serve the city's interest in improving its physical aesthetics and public safety through sign regulation. Together, they can enhance the city's attractiveness as a place to work, recreate, and reside. In this slide, the department is recommending approval of the second sign ordinance, that's item number 10, as well as approval with modifications of the first sign ordinance, that's item number 9. The modifications are the following: eliminate reference to the Candlestick Park Area Special Sign District in the code and the zoning map. As mentioned in the case report, the Candlestick Point Design for Development document, which is managed by OCII, is the guiding land use document for the area, which makes these planning code controls redundant unnecessarily. Also, another modification would be to amend the definition of wind sign. The department supports including signs with only one banner or flag into the definition of wind sign. This will bring these types of signs under existing regulations for wind signs, and this will improve or aim to improve the aesthetics of the built environment. The last modification would be to amend the definition of historic sign. The department supports these changes, which will also allow signs that are character-defining features of a property to be considered historic signs. With that concludes my presentation, and I am available for questions. Thank you.
Okay, opening up to public comment. Tom Radulovich, I have as one speaker.
Good afternoon, commissioners, and welcome, Commissioner Koppel. I didn't email you about this because you weren't on the city's website yet, but hopefully you are by now. We just wanted to, on behalf of Livable City, speak in favor of both ordinances. What we really like about these, and we just really wanted to commend Supervisor Peskin for bringing these forward, and for your planning staff for their excellent staff report and their great recommendations, and we definitely support all the staff recommendations. But what these ordinances did was really going to go to what are the purpose of sign controls? Why do we regulate signs in San Francisco? And really look at those again and refresh them and make sure that they're our current purposes and that they align well with the other things we're trying to do. And some of those things have been, we've tried to create a quality public realm in San Francisco: street trees, sidewalks, urban designs, good streets and public places, and our sign control should complement that. We try to preserve views, neighborhood architecture, the distinctiveness of the city. We've tried to promote local and small businesses and really give them a good and decent shot at competing with these major national chains and so on. So these sign controls are very much in keeping with the values of the city today. And that look is great. We think you should do that with other areas of your controls, like your parking controls. Are they serving current needs? Are they aligned well with your other city values? Just thought I'd mention that again because it's important to do that. And then it goes into the specifics of how. And we think these controls make a lot of sense. One thing in particular we need to think about is we have these zoning districts, commercial, neighborhood commercial, residential, and so on. But in reality, we have people living in every neighborhood of the city. So really about, somewhere between 10 and 15 feet above the sidewalk, there's a residential neighborhood in virtually every neighborhood of the city. And we really need to think, and by policy, we're pushing more and more housing into these mixed-use neighborhoods. So we really need to think about the sign controls for places where people reside. What about light trespass? What about views? What about air? What about blinking and all those intrusions that you get into that residential space? So how can the commercial uses on the ground floors and lower floors thrive, be able to communicate with their customers at eye level, but then also create that better environment above? So we think looking again at these billboard controls, which really do nothing for the city, they're a net negative, and then also some of those standards for the business signs as well makes a lot of sense. So we urge you to support both ordinances, and we think, just let's continue to look at our controls and refresh them. When we were looking at the C district sign controls, last time they were updated, I think it was the 1960s. So it's time for a fresh look at a lot of these things. Thank you.
Is there any additional public comment?
Okay. Yeah, my name is Ronald Lee. Some of you guys know me. I've seen some of the kiosks where you put signs, that's fine, but I've also seen where there's nightclubs in the Mission District, for example, where there's nightclubs. They have wrapped so many different concert posters where there's a nightclub around some of the poles that you could tear them off and you could find ancient posters. Now, one thing about the nightclub posters, that's a fire hazard. I mean, someone could just set a match. In the Mission District, I've seen where the nightclubs are, just these huge amount of posters that you just have to tear down. Now, using Scotch tape is one thing, but when they use saran wrap, I've seen people use saran wrap and they wrap around a pole and it's very hard to pull down. It's plastic. Now, I know it's hard to control rock and roll posters, but you have to get some kind of control over it, because I've seen where nightclubs have, they want to advertise their bands. But, you've got to get some control, because not only is it a fire hazard, but, posters are posters. But, when they accumulate like that on poles, on light poles, that's a different thing. I don't think you should be allowed to do that. Actually put it on, like anything that's a light fixture, any kind of pole that has a light fixture at all. It should have a very designated poster area that you could put it on. That's the only comment I have to make. I know it sounds weird, but you have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Any other public comment on this item? Okay, not seeing any public comments closed. And Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you very much for this ordinance, or a couple of ordinances. I think these are good moves. I agree with Mr. Radulovich on a number of them, and I also to the other public commenter who talked about the nightclub signs. That's not weird. I think it's more of an enforcement issue. Like, how do you run around and chase people who are taping these things up? So I just have a couple things on the. I also think one other positive benefit, if I'm interpreting this correctly, is getting rid of the special light districts gets rid of blinking and flashing lights on some of these signs, and I really feel like doing that move will help decrease our light pollution problem that we have in certain neighborhoods. So I actually applaud that move as well, although I don't know that was like one of the main purposes of having these ordinances. I just have two quick questions. The first one is there's a window sign provision that to be allowed in CM and PDR districts as long as they do not exceed a third of the window area. And I have a question. I think this might be a planning staff question. I think we already have rules. I don't know if it's in our residential design guidelines or if it's actually in the planning code about required transparency. And I'm wondering, is this duplicative of that, or is our requirements not actually in the planning code?
I don't think this would be duplicative in the sense that the transparency requirements would require a certain amount of glazing. And this would be saying, okay, on top of that glazing, only so much of that can house, if you will, a window sign.
No, I'm in transparency, as in we have rules around how much of a window space on a ground floor, like retail, you have to be able to see through it.
Right.
Right, because it's come up a lot for like medical marijuana dispensaries and other sorts of uses like that. And I'm trying to think of whether or not that requirement is just our sign guidelines, or is that in the planning code? Maybe we're looking at Aaron.
Our transparency requirements in the planning code, but we have sort of a interpretation of those transparency requirements as a separate document that we issued, I think, 2 years ago. I think the third of an area of a window is also, we have that for neighborhood commercial districts now, so it's just mimicking that same control we have in there.
That control is not in the, that's in the
No, that control
zoning.
is
That's in the zoning, right? So it is in the planning.
It is in the planning code.
Yeah.
But I think right now it only applies to like neighborhood commercial districts, and this would apply it to CPDR and industrial districts.
Industrial districts in general.
Okay, so if I'm thinking Venn diagram, there's like a lot of overlap, but maybe there's some areas on the edge where one applies and one covers it and the other one doesn't.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, maybe that's my minutia.
I think
All right.
so, yeah.
Sorry. Okay. The second question I have is totally understanding the reason around state constitution and otherwise why you have to exempt signs that are for bulletin boards that are for churches or nonprofit or other institutions. But I was wondering, how does that overlap with, for example, we've had commercial institutions like Umpqua Bank that part of their model of how they're in the community is to provide space for community institutions, some of which might be protected institutions where their bulletin boards for their signage for their meetings and whatnot would be sort of protected under this regulation. So my question is, if an organization like that wanted to have a permanent bulletin board that says, here are the meetings that we're sponsoring, would they not be allowed to have that sign?
It's not that they won't be allowed, it's that we'd apply a different set of regulations if there was commercial speech on it or not. And I think we might have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, the ZA's office.
Yeah, because I'm just trying to think, because sometimes there might be, right? If you think of like the Umpqua Bank that we approved, that's on like 17th Street, I think that's where it is. You know, if they say 50% of our time we give the space away for 50% off or free to nonprofits or other cultural institutions to have their meetings, and so the bulletin board is for identifying those meetings or pointing people to them. Does that mean that if they wanted to have a permanent bulletin board for that but then other times they just put the hours of the store up there, like what would happen to that bulletin board? Is it not allowed to be permanent? Are you not allowed to have it?
It's not that, assuming if it was 100% for commercial speech, it's not that it probably wouldn't be allowed. It'd be under a certain set of regulations under size and projection and whatnot. I think in the case report it did say that we would try to apply this on a case-by-case basis, depending on what it's actually being used for. And I think that's a very interesting, maybe a dilemma, I guess, or situation that you bring up. Yeah.
I think it's a dilemma, and I think it's a dilemma we should solve, because I've already seen examples of it where we have voluntary businesses come and say that's our way of integrating ourselves into the community, and it's definitely something that we will want to see for larger, especially ground floor space-taking uses that we actually ask for. Do you have community space? Are you dedicating space to meetings for different organizations? And having signage to be able to delineate that use from the commercial use of the property is really important. And so I would actually ask that maybe the supervisor's office consider that. And maybe it might actually, if you say your bulletin board will be there, if you dedicate some of your time to be able to use it for nonprofits or cultural institutions, that might be an incentive to see more of those uses. So it's both a dilemma, but also a potential good thing in the future to solve that problem right now. Yeah, so that might be more a recommendation for our finding, maybe, or representative supervisor's office is here, so you heard it.
Just briefly, I mean, we're happy to take that into consideration. I think that it's an interesting incentivization and issue of balance between, wanting to provide space for non-commercial speech that is good, and that, again, we are prohibited from regulating, while also balancing that against the
Yeah, right.
evil we're trying to prohibit here.
Yeah. Thank you. And then, I'm sorry, what can a vintage sign, that definition was very confusing to me. Can you just go over that one more time?
Sure. The vintage sign, I think that the first one was the, if I'm not mistaken, the Coca-Cola sign on, I think it was Cortland in Bernal Heights, where my understanding is not necessarily an historic building or historic sign in itself, but it's something that lends to the character of the community. And so I believe that's why this new sign use category was developed to, I don't know if preserve is the right answer, but sort of preserve a vintage sign and recognize that it's lending character to the neighborhood. So that's where it's a little bit different than the historic sign, when it has to be attached to something that's recognized by one of the historic registers, or it's designated in one of the articles of the planning code, or itself it lends it's one of the character defining features lending to that. So it's a little bit different. So the attachment is not with necessarily having to be with an historic building or something, from what I understand, in an historic register.
Okay, so just a quick example, so I understand. Cheryl Flats, there's an industrial building. There used to be a widget factory, and it says Jones Widget Factory. And then they do an adaptive reuse, and now it's apartments and all sorts of things, but they leave a sign that says Jones Widget Factory. That would be a vintage sign.
It has to go through a conditional use authorization process, but I think there's a way for that to occur.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Moore.
Great legislation, long overdue, particularly with the onslaught of moving back a little bit more to the 60s, where more buildings are going to signage which looks dated as far as I'm concerned. Voters speaking 202, 207, 209, I think should give enough reason for this to be really strongly supported. Mr. Radulovic, thank you for summarizing it so well. I'm not going to repeat what you said, but I fully and wholeheartedly support your observations. What I would like to ask is, for my own reference, also picking up on what Commissioner Johnson just said, that there is a glossary. The use of interchangeable words in signage is quite tricky. Commercial signs, advertising signs, identifying signs, regulatory signs, and. When it comes to reading the code and understanding what you can complain about or not, it would be very good to have a glossary that includes wind signs, illuminated signs, flashing signs, moving signs, historic signs, vintage signs, and on and on and on. The one thing, and zoning administrator Sanchez isn't here today, we have seen signage which is basically full glazed pasting on films with what I consider to be commercial advertising. What I consider advertising rather than commercial identification is a big issue. Another question that this commission, particularly Commissioner Fong and I have talked about it, is the excessive use of corporate logos and forms of signs becoming architectural elements which are really advertising rather than anything else. There's commercial identification with bringing on your logo once and having it in a prominent place, but by, can I mention the name? By, for example, Chase Bank, Corner, Montgomery, and Sutter using it about 14 to 20 times in one window that is just over the top. And then I'm wondering how this legislation would help us sort that out in an equitable, non-confrontational way. So those would be my comments, and I move to approve with staff recommendation and move to approve as is required in the second part.
For both items.
For both items,
Thank you
yes.
very much.
Second.
There's nothing further, Commissioners. There is a motion that has been seconded to adopt a recommendation for approval with modifications for items 9 and 10. On that motion, Commissioner Hillis.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Koppler.
Aye.
Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
And Commission President Fong.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously, 5-0.
Okay, we actually do have a relatively short calendar, but we're going to go ahead and take a break and come back in about 20 minutes or so.
SF Gov TV, San Francisco Government Television. SF Gov TV, San Francisco Government Television.
I'll remind members of the public to please silence your mobile devices that may sound off during these proceedings. Commissioners, we left off under your regular calendar on items 11 and 12 for case numbers 2010.0305 GPA and 2010.0515 GPA, the Sunnydale Hope SF Master Plan Project and the Potrero Hope SF Master Plan Project. These are initiation of general plan amendments.
Good afternoon, President Fong, members of the Commission. I'm Matt Snyder of the Department staff. Before you is two very similar actions for the Hope SF Potrero and Hope SF Sunnydale projects. We've been here several times before you to describe those projects, but very quickly, the Hope SF looks to completely rehabilitate two housing authority sites, one on Potrero Hill, the south and east slopes of Potrero, and then one in the Visitation Valley neighborhood. The projects would, over time, demolish all existing dwelling units, all existing affordable dwelling units, replace them, add additional affordable housing along with market rate housing. The projects would include completely rebuilding the streets to make them better connect with the surrounding neighborhoods and city, add additional parks and community facilities for those neighborhoods. Currently, as I had mentioned, we've been here several times. You've already certified the environmental impact reports for both projects. You've also made a couple of other actions on behalf of Potrero. Right now, the development agreement is being finalized between the city and the master developers. We prepared text and map amendments as well that we expect to be initiated by the Board of Supervisors very, very quickly. Before you are general plan amendments to initiate. As a first step, President Fong, you had requested that we bring these general plan amendments before you as required by Planning Codes Section 340. Again, the amendments are for two general plan maps, one in the urban design element, one in the open space. The recreation and open space element, specifically the urban design element, indicates the heights of buildings throughout San Francisco. The new designation would be in a 41 to 88 foot designation, and I should just note that we're not planning on building up to the 88 feet. That's just how the designation is on this particular map. And then in the recreation and open space, proposed and existing parks, we would also like to indicate the new open spaces that are now planned for these two neighborhoods. The resolutions before you is to initiate these amendments and then also to set a hearing date. I think in our in the resolutions we had indicated October 13th, which was when we had hoped to be before you initially. That hearing is now scheduled for November 17th. So I would ask that you amend the resolution to reflect that. This concludes my presentation for these general plan amendments. I am happy to answer any questions you have. Staff members from MoCD, project sponsors from Bridge Housing on behalf of Potrero, and Mercy Housing on behalf of Sunnydale are also here. Thank you.
Okay. Are there anything else from staff at all? Does that conclude staff's? Okay, great. Opening up to public comment.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Corey Smith on behalf of the 300 members of the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. I want to continue the Love Fest. Welcome Commissioner Koppel to the board here. We can do the marathon starting next week. The Housing Action Coalition has been involved with the Hope SF plan since its original implementation. We have always been completely supportive of the proposals and what the city is doing. So both 11 and 12, I ask you to please approve and move it forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional public comment on this item? Okay, not seeing any public comments closed. Commissioner Moore.
Mr. Snyder, all three projects are of equal importance to us. Where is visitation in this particular time schedule?
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Sunnydale is within Visitation Valley. So these two projects are moving in tandem, both Potrero and the Sunnydale projects, and we plan to be here before you in November so that you can approve all of the master plan approvals, including zoning map and text amendments, the creation of a special use district, the adoption of design guidelines, the adoption of or recommendation of adoption of these general plan amendments, and then approval of the development agreement.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Move to initiate amendments, including the revised date of November 17th.
Second.
Commissioner Johnson?
Thank you. Always good to see movement on the Hope SF initiative front. Quick question. I was a little bit confused by the maps that were included in our packet. So the first one that is intended to demonstrate height of the buildings under the urban design guidelines, the shading is for 41 to 88 feet. That is over Potrero, Sunnydale, and Potrero, Hope SF. But the heights for these projects are 40 to 60 feet?
Right. So the map designation, the way this map works is the designations in the general plan are broader, have a broader scope than what the zoning will ultimately say. So because the way this map works, it's a 41 to 88 designation. That's what we're going to shade it as. When you get the zoning map amendments, they will indicate a lower map. They will a lower height range within that 88 feet. It'll only be up to 65 feet.
Okay, thank you. And then that's helpful. And then for the second map showing the open space, again, I was a little bit confused because the map that's actually in our packet didn't highlight Potrero or Sunnydale, and so it was hard to see what areas were reconfigured to show the open space. Can you just point out?
Sure. So Potrero is located, again, on the south and east slopes of Potrero Hill.
Oh, I know where it is. I mean, I was like, there's that red box that's there. Is that supposed to kind of show it?
I think that was, I'm sorry, I think that was an editorial mistake. It was when we were going to highlight them. I didn't realize that got transmitted into your packets. But so I mean, the intention was just to show the maps as they are now.
So that's the maps as they are now, and then we will see.
Yeah, so the maps. So then, when we come before you with the actual amendments, they will show these maps change or noted that they will be changed.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
There's nothing further, Commissioners. There is a motion that has been seconded to initiate both general plan amendments and set a hearing date on November 17th. On that motion, Commissioner Hillis?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Koppler?
Aye.
Commissioner Moore?
Aye.
And Commission President Fong?
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 5-0. Commissioners, that'll place us on item 13 for case number 2014.1279 ENX at 249 Pennsylvania Avenue. This is a large project authorization.
Good afternoon, Planning Commission. Chris Towns with planning staff. The project before you is a large project authorization for the proposed mixed-use project located at 249 Pennsylvania Avenue. Under the large project authorization, the project is seeking modifications from the planning code requirements for 1 rear yard, 2 dwelling unit exposure, and 3 horizontal mass reduction. The property is located within the UMU, or Urban Mixed Use District, as well as the 40X Height and Bulk District within the Potrero Hill neighborhood. The site is composed of 3 contiguous parcels located at the southeast corner of Pennsylvania Avenue and Mariposa Street, currently occupied by Center Hardware, as well as a film and production studio. The property is located within a transitioning neighborhood, which is light industrial and heritage, that's evolving more into a mixed-use neighborhood that aims to preserve its industrial roots. The site is also immediately adjacent to the I-280 elevated freeway along the east property line. The project proposes the demolition of the 2 existing PDR buildings and the construction of a new 4-story, 40-foot tall, 76,000 square foot mixed-use building that would contain 59 dwelling units, 3,400 square feet of ground floor PDR space, and the project includes 44 off-street parking spaces within a subterranean level garage. The project also contains approximately 15,000 square feet of common usable open space in the form of a front entry plaza at the ground floor, a rear courtyard, as well as a 12,000 square foot roof deck. The project includes a mixture of dwelling units containing 33 one-bedrooms, 22 two-bedrooms, and 4 three-bedroom units. The massing is organized in a U-shaped configuration with a 15-foot side setback along the south property line. The building maintains a well-defined street wall along the frontages, and the building steps in relation to the laterally sloping topography along Pennsylvania Avenue. The rear yard includes an approximately 30-foot tall, what's called a green wall, that provides an artistic element that couples as a visual and sound buffer from the elevated freeway. With regard to public comment, the department received 2 letters of support, including one from the Pennsylvania Street Gardens Organization, which maintains the public open space immediately adjacent to the property, and one from the Center Hardware Ownership, which is looking forward to their relocation along the 3rd Street corridor. A telephone comment was also received from former Mayor Art Agnos, who recommended that the project increase its 3-bedroom composition from what was previously proposed, which was 2 units. The sponsor proactively decided to increase the count from 2 to 4. During the review phase, the sponsor also conducted community outreach with the adjacent neighbors, the Potrero Boosters, as well as the Grow Potrero Responsibly groups. And I could hand out some public comments which were received both after the packet mailing, and that kind of summarized the Potrero Boosters' comments. Subsequent to the packet mailing, the sponsor worked with the Potrero Boosters also to develop supplemental condition language for the community liaison provision, located on page 31 and 32 of your X motion. And I want to read that into the record now. Staff has reviewed this condition language and is supportive. So at the end of the community liaison provision, or condition of approval rather, the condition will now read, quote, "In addition, prior to commencing excavation or construction, the community liaison shall provide written public notice comparable to a pre-application meeting required for projects subject to Planning Code Section 311 or 312. This public notice shall discuss the construction dust management plan, referred to as the plan. The project sponsor shall conduct a meeting with interested neighbors before project sponsor finalizes the plan. Such notice will inform neighbors how to sign up for notifications on construction progress, no less than 1 week prior to demolition activities, and then monthly. The community liaison shall provide updates to such community members as to the construction activities and field any complaints and questions from the community," end quote. So staff is generally supportive of the project as a whole, inclusive of the LPA modifications sought. However, because the project sponsor changed their selection to satisfy their inclusionary affordable housing requirement subsequent to the packet mailing, staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt a motion of intent to approve and hear the inclusionary housing provision at a later date. Staff recommends the intent to approve based on the following. The project complies with the applicable requirements of the area and general plan. The project is located within a zoning district in which residential use and ground floor PDR are principally permitted uses. The project produces a new mixed-use development with comprehensive streetscape improvements in accordance with the San Francisco Better Streets Plan that will provide 59 new dwelling units, approximately 3,400 square feet of ground floor PDR space to partially offset the PDR that's being displaced as a result. The project exceeds the minimum 40% 2-bedroom and larger requirement of the planning code by providing 44% 2 bedrooms or larger, including 22 2-bedrooms and 4 3-bedrooms. The project is compatible and respects the existing neighborhood character and provides an appropriate mass and scale for this corner site. That concludes my presentation, and if you have any questions, I'm available.
Okay, thank you. Did you have, Mr. Scray?
Yeah, Commissioners, just to clarify the affordable housing component, since the project sponsor has switched their affordable housing from fee to on-site, and they are proposing a rental project, the city is required to execute a Costa-Hawkins agreement, and since the Commission doesn't have the agreement before them, and if you are so inclined, we would recommend you to adopt a motion of intent to approve, and then we would place this item on our future calendar and bring it back as a consent item.
Okay, opening up to public comment, if there's any.
Project sponsor.
I'm sorry, project sponsor. Sorry.
There we go. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Steve Vettel for LeBron and Martel on behalf of the project sponsor, the William Spencer Company. First, let me welcome Commissioner Koppel. Congratulate you on your appointment. Can we get the overhead PowerPoint? The project site is at Mariposa Street and Pennsylvania Avenue on the east slope of Potrero Hill. It slopes fairly significantly uphill from north to south along Pennsylvania. It is also across the street from other residential developments and within 1 block of the new Mariposa Park in Mission Bay, which you can see on the upper right corner of the slide. It is only a few blocks from the neighborhood commercial corridor along 18th Street and is within a short walk of the T3rd Muni Metro line on 3rd Street. The zoning is UMU, a district in which housing is principally permitted, and the site has a 40-foot height limit. The site borders the Pennsylvania Street Gardens on 18th, the Pennsylvania Street Garden at 18th and Pennsylvania, a community garden to the left of this slide, and the project site is on the right. The community garden is on Caltrans land adjacent to the off-ramp. The adjacency of the freeway dictates certain design decisions that the architect will describe, and the project incorporates filtered ventilation for all the units as required by the health code. The project site is currently occupied by Center Hardware, a wholesale and retail supplier, and another small PDR tenant. Center Hardware will be relocating within the neighborhood to 3003 3rd Street and another building owned by the Spencers. In our brief, we included a letter from Keith Gettner, president of Central Hardware, describing their plans to relocate. He notes the new site is a good fit for the company, is close by, and provides more and better parking for his wholesale customers. The project also contains 3,246 square feet of double-height PDR space along the level street frontage on Mariposa Street. The project proposes 59 dwelling units, including 4 3-bedroom units and 22 2-bedroom units. As Mr. Towns noted, we are now proposing on-site inclusionary units rather than feeing out. Under Prop C, trailing legislation, the on-site percentage increased to 16.4%, resulting in 10 on-site BMR units, including 1 3-bedroom unit and 4 2-bedroom units. Prior to Prop C, the requirement would have been only 8 on-site units. The project is consistent with the Showplace Square Potrero area plan, the UMU district controls, and the 40-foot height limit. It requires only 2 LPA modifications, one for the configuration of the rear yard, and a second, a unit exposure exception for 11 of the 59 units that face onto the rear yard. The rear yard is 25 feet wide, but it does not increase in height to 35 feet at the upper floors to be strictly compliant. No other exceptions are being sought. The Planning Department is in support of these minor modifications and of the final design. I would note that the project was continued from a June hearing date to this date so that the Planning Department staff could work with the architect on finalizing the design. Community benefits. The project will provide a significant package of community benefits. In addition to the 10 on-site BMR units and relocation of Center Hardware, the project will provide $35,000 in funding to the Pennsylvania Street Gardens. The building is also set back 15 feet from the southern garden to maximize solar access to that garden. Our brief includes a letter from the garden's founder, Emily Gogol, expressing the garden's support for the project. We believe this contribution to an adjacent open space makes the most sense, rather than this project donating those funds to Friends of Jackson Playground. Jackson Playground is 6 blocks away to the northwest of the site, not nearby. The project will also pay over $1 million in Eastern Neighborhoods infrastructure fee, child care fee, transportation sustainability fee, and school fee. We are not seeking any reduction of those fees through an in-kind agreement. Finally, we've agreed to update our immediate neighbors prior to start of construction, to discuss the dust control plan, and to update our neighbors monthly during construction. The CPE also imposed construction period noise and air quality mitigation measures to minimize construction impacts. The team presented to the project to the Potrero boosters in June, where the design and other features were well reserved. I do have some additional support letters that were not in your package I'd like to hand out as well. And let me now introduce Juancho Isidoro from D-Scheme Architects to walk you through the project design. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Welcome, Commissioner Culpo. We look forward to working with you this next few years. Director Jocelyn, Mr. Sucre. My name is Juancho C. Isidoro Jr. Next to me is Youngmin Jun. We are with D-Scheme Studio Architects, and it's our pleasure to be here again to present our new project, 249 Pennsylvania Avenue. We all have very busy schedules. We're often moving back and forth, doing one thing or another, rushing from one point to the next. We do this almost every day. We do it sitting down, standing up, walking, running, or biking. Now imagine driving down the road or the freeway. We're constantly focused on the view directly in front of us. As this happens, our peripheral view, that part of our vision that is just outside our center gaze, is constantly in motion. We perceive this motion as blurred, indistinct images. The objects become more and more distorted, becoming more abstract as they pass us by. The same happens when we are standing still. We perceive objects moving around us as blurred, indistinct images, with objects seemingly imperceptible, almost ghost-like. Indeed, our building design concept is derived from this same abstract imagery. Motion lines, as we like to call them, are the abstract lines that appear behind a moving object, parallel to its direction of movement, making it appear to be in motion. This is our design concept. It recognizes the significance of the project site and how it relates to the adjacent freeway and the constant movement of cars. We have incorporated randomly placed horizontal metal fins that represent these motion lines. We further enhance the building facade's exterior finishes by organizing them in the same general horizontal pattern. Enabled to mitigate the constant road noise from the freeway, we are proposing a green wall that runs along the rear property line and parallel to the freeway. The green wall is designed similar to the building with a predominant horizontal pattern of greenery in planter boxes with an integrated water delivery system. In addition, it will consist of a mix of transparent, translucent, and opaque glass or acrylic panels. The combination of materials and colors serve mainly as a sound barrier, but also acts as a visual screen, an optical filter, if you will, for the residents looking out towards the east. The proposed building is generally 40 feet in height, as prescribed in the planning code. It steps down laterally along the steep sloping Pennsylvania Avenue, in keeping with the general topography of the immediate neighborhood. It includes a sidewalk corner bulb out and 19 new street trees, which adopts the San Francisco Better Streets Plan. The ground floor at the corner of Mariposa Street and Pennsylvania Avenue offers 2 PDR spaces of approximately 3,400 total square feet. It has a combined 92% active use along both street frontages, which will enhance the connection between the public and private areas. We propose 4 residential units with private entry stoops along Pennsylvania Avenue, which will encourage positive public and sidewalk activities. It will add 59 residential units to the city's housing stock, 49 parking spaces, including 2 spaces for PDR use and 2 car share spaces and 80 bicycle spaces. It also offers more than 15,000 square feet of open space at the front courtyard entry, side yard, rear yard, and roof deck. The building envelope creates the maximum exposure to all the units as it provides open spaces and yards in 3 separate areas. Over the course of the last few months, we have worked with the planning staff to refine the details of the building exterior, making sure the design concept is preserved and yet addressing their concerns. The result is the proposed building before you. We present this project to you today for your kind consideration and approval. We'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, opening up, are you part of the team or public comment?
Public comment.
Okay, opening up to public comment.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Yoram Meroz. I'm speaking for myself and for Grove Potrero responsibly. First issue I'd like to address is the issue of parking. The The current project has the maximum allowable off-street private parking spots. With its proximity being right to the freeway, being right next to the on-ramp and off-ramp, this will appeal especially for people who are commuting to the South Bay. Since the current aim of planning in San Francisco is to reduce private car traffic, and since this particular corner happens to be the most congested area of Potrero Hill and of the neighboring neighborhoods, I strongly ask that the number of parking spaces be reduced as a condition for approving of the project. I do, however, think that providing parking space for the PDR businesses is a good idea. I'd also like to mention that since Center Hardware has moved that, which was one of the few retail spaces of its size available for the neighborhood, just because of that, there is going to be more private car traffic generated now by people who need to go further away, even for basic hardware needs. Second issue I'd like to bring up is affordable housing. I'm glad to hear that the project sponsors have opted for on-site building. However, the property has been held by the same owners for decades. It has been last time it was assessed was at $700,000 for the entire property and buildings on it, which means it's practically they're practically getting the land for free. I suggest that with this fortune that this developer carries more than the normal burden of affordable housing, rather than people who have to pay market values for land. They have more financial flexibility to do that, and the city right now is suffering much more shortage of affordable units than of units in general. Thank you.
Okay, is there additional public comment?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Mo Jamil, President of Middle Polk Neighborhood Association. Welcome, Commissioner Koppel. I wanted to make a brief comment on this project. I saw it a couple months ago on one of the write-ups online to point out that it's an example of when you have a soft site with an important neighborhood community business where a sponsor worked with the neighborhood, worked with the business, worked with the community, and did the hard work before coming to the commission. And I think that's important because I know in our side of the city, if we have something like this come up with, trying to move businesses around, the law is not very helpful. So it really requires a lot of negotiation and a lot of hard work, and I wanted to commend the sponsor on that because it would have been terrible to come here to the commission and have a fight about what's better, a neighborhood business or a housing project, because you're not going to make, somebody's going to get upset in that debate. So I just wanted to make that comment here today. Parking, I agree 100%. Probably could reduce some of the parking here and still have a great project. With that, I'd say if the boosters are in support and neighborhood supports the project, they did a lot of hard work, the sponsors and their representatives. I think that should be commended. And I'd ask the commission just to take notice of that for future projects and hold project sponsors to that same level of standard and commitment. Thank you.
Any additional public comment? Okay, not seeing any public comments closed. Commissioner Moore.
Delighted to hear in the presentation that one thing which concerns this commission has been amended, and that is indeed providing on-site affordable, which I think the Commission has consistently supported for the last 2 or 3 years. Generally, I think this is an extremely challenging site, and some very good approaches to looking at a site which aggregates 3 lots. I think the stepping of the project along Pennsylvania Avenue is a very, very positive one, rather than extruding it as one solid mass. This, I think, is an interesting silhouette looking from the Pennsylvania street side. The question I'd like to ask goes slightly beyond just looking at this site, but it goes to a discussion we had probably a year and a half ago on 650, 680 Indiana, which was also a freeway site. 3 architects took a project of similar size and created a very interesting composition of 3 buildings. But what this project did, and I'm questioning it on this project, is the public side of the project for the residents is Pennsylvania. However, for the rest of the citizen, it's a 280 east-facing facade. And I do personally not see enough disclosure in my package, 3-dimensionally and otherwise, on the success of that side being indeed opening up to the community beyond and basically making the building an integral part of the community rather than a fortress-looking building. I'm concerned that the green wall combination structure, which emulates a replication of the building facade now on the freeway edge, is too massive a statement. I question that a green wall, a freestanding green wall of that size, can be successful, and as to whether or not it is indeed the public side of the project, I feel comfortable about. The wall is only shown to us, not 3-dimensionally, but as a black and white drawing in an elevation which overimposes a building, east-facing building facade with the wall. That is, I think, a shortcoming in the presentation. I saw a brief glimpse in the architect's projecting images on the screen, but not enough for me to be very comfortable with it. These types of walls, if you travel abroad, start to be only looking like sound attenuating walls and not more than that. They start to shut off the community from the freeway, and the freeway becomes only a movement corridor, not allowing views to beyond. And I am questioning as to whether or not I would ask the department. I'm in full support of the project on all the other aspects. Unit design is good. Nested bedrooms, which we normally look at critically, are well resolved here, but this wall doesn't quite do it for me. And I would ask the planning department. Mr. Joslin, that's correct. I'm sorry, my mind dumb. Mr. Joslin and Mr. Sucre, as to whether or not we can take that particular element of the project back and think about that in a slightly different context. It just is too massive, it is too relentless, and I don't think ultimately it helps the subtlety of the facade description to really be accentuated. I think it wipes it out. So I am supportive of the project, but would basically require a new approach to this wall.
Sure, Commissioner Moore. I'm confident, given the architect's willingness to work with us to date, that this could be something that could be resolved similar to the 800 Indiana Street project, which if you remember, the Commission added a condition of approval to basically help improve the architectural treatment with a particular focus from the freeway looking down basically at the project.
I'm prepared to ask that 1 or 2 commissioners help in that discussion or participate. I would be very interested to kind of see the idea develop around criteria which speak about the city at large who is using the movement corridor. I'm fine on the Pennsylvania street side, but I am not at all comfortable on the wall portion of the public east-facing side of the freeway. So that with that, I make a motion of intent to approve, given that there are other pending issues regarding affordability and the Costa-Hawkins agreement, and the caveat that the wall needs to be rethought.
Second.
Commissioner Moore, if you could also add a specific date so that we don't have to renotice this I believe we were talking about a month, and so I would suggest November 3rd as a possible hearing date
I
to
would
potentially
have to really
place
ask
it on
Mr.
consent.
Joslin and staff. We have very full calendars. This will take a little bit of scheduling and timing. I'm not sure what the portion with the city attorney and the Costa Hawkins takes. We need to be kind of sensitive that there needs to be also think time and feedback time in that loop. I don't have any idea.
I think November 3rd is a fine date. It will take us usually about a couple weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, to execute the Costa Hawkins agreement. So that'll give us ample time.
I would have to rely on your suggestion as November 3rd being the one. Thank you.
Commissioner Hillis.
So I also am very supportive of I think the project sponsor has done a great job with the architecture. I mean, we rarely see when buildings step up a hill that you don't have the floors all at the same level. I think we've asked for that in the past too, and developers have had a hard time accommodating that on kind of a facade this length. So I think that's an extremely effective way to start breaking up the facade of this building. I think you've done it well and added elevators with 2 stops and stairs in corridors, but I think it works well, and I like the design also. So I'm fully supportive. I get some of the comments on the wall, and I just think it would be helpful to see that space more, because I actually think it probably is a better job than we've seen done elsewhere in A4-1, where you do show kind of a snippet of the wall. It's visually and architecturally interesting, and I think if we saw that better in like A2-1, it could give us, just a better sense of what that wall looks like. But I generally like the direction that's going. It's not the entire building. It's kind of balancing the ability to give folks some open space to live in there that aren't directly on the freeway, and balancing that with the visual from the freeway. So it'd be good to see more as that comes forward, but I'm very supportive.
Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you very much. Also supportive of this project. I think it's good, and hopefully some of the design change. I don't know if there's going to be design changes. I like the living wall. I always just have questions about maintenance, but I like what it's doing for the face. But maybe we'll see something change for the next meeting, but I'm supportive of what we have today. Only thing I want to mention about the parking to people who mentioned that in public comment, and I looked at this as well, the layout doesn't really allow us to reduce parking in a way that will be meaningful for the project. There may be more impacts to traffic in the neighborhood for having less parking spaces, but from a land use perspective and looking at how the building relates to its surroundings, reducing parking doesn't really get us all that much because it's subterranean and the PDR space is not right above the parking. So if you were to reduce the parking, it's not like you could replace it with anything other than maybe another building amenity. And I do feel that the addition of 49 spaces it's additional. It's additional cars in the neighborhood, that's for sure. But I don't feel that it's in the scale of other projects we've seen that have come to us with hundreds of parking spaces. So for that reason, I'm supportive of that. The only thing I will say about that is I do believe that this project will find itself overparked in a short period of time. When it's in a few years, this will be one of those buildings where you look and half the spaces are empty. So I hope the project sponsors begin to think about what sort of adaptive reuse techniques that they might think of, amenities or otherwise, that they might want to put in the space where the parking is now, because I do foresee that for many buildings going up in this neighborhood.
Commissioner Koppel.
Yeah, I'd like to echo the fellow commissioners' comments on the size of the units that may so need to accommodate a car. There's going to be more families in these units rather than, a studio or one bedroom. Also, I want to make sure people understand the importance of the Center Hardware relocation. If you could even call it a parking lot, they had a tiny parking lot in front, which was pretty much just a curb, so that they're going to actually have a parking lot which will enable them to accommodate more business and flourish and still stay in the local vicinity. So hopefully no one's under the impression that this business is being outcast or moved under their will. Happy to support the project, like the looks of the project. Would also like to see, like Catherine Moore says, the green wall and that freeway facing side, but I'm in full support of the project.
Commissioners, then there is a motion that has been seconded to approve the project, to adopt a motion of intent to approve the project as proposed with design modifications with support of one or two commissioners, as well as the Costa-Hawkins agreement to be in place and to continue this project to November 3rd. On that motion, Commissioner Hillis.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Koppler.
Aye.
Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
And Commission President Fong. So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 5-0. Commissioners, that'll place us on item 15 for case number 2016-005514 CUA at 4489 Mission Street. This is a conditional use authorization.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Nancy Tran, Planning Department staff. The item before you is a request for a conditional use authorization to allow a change of use to Formula Retail at 4489 Mission Street between Avalon and Excelsior Avenues. This property is located within the Excelsior Outer Mission Street Neighborhood Commercial District and 40X Height and Bulk District. The proposal involves the Cricket Wireless. Per planning code definition, Cricket Wireless is a Formula Retail use since it has more than 11 locations. The subject property at 4489 Mission Street is a two-story building with residential on the upper floor. Cricket Wireless will occupy the vacant commercial space on the ground floor. The proposed hours of operation will be from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Saturday and 11 to 6 p.m. on Sunday. Cricket Wireless sells mobility products and services, including devices, plans, and accessories. This project will create 3 new employment opportunities, 1 full-time and 2 part-time. It's expected that the majority of employees and customers will get to the project site via transit or by walking. The project also includes interior tenant improvements and minor alterations. The trademark awning will be submitted under a separate sign permit and will be required to comply with planning code and Formula Retail signage guidelines. The area surrounding the project site is mixed use in character. A variety of commercial establishments are located within the ground floor storefronts, including restaurants, convenience stores, personal service, and other types of retailers. Most buildings in the vicinity are 1 to 3 stories in height, with upper floors generally occupied by residential. The project sponsor conducted a Formula Retail survey. In the larger Excelsior Outer Mission NCD, there are approximately 466 businesses, and of that number, approximately 10% are Formula Retail. The proposal will increase the Formula Retail concentration within both the NCD and quarter-mile vicinity by less than 1%. Since publication of the case report, the department has received no additional communication from the public. The department is in general support of the project and recommends approval with conditions for the following reasons. The project will have a slight increase of less than 1% in the Formula Retail concentration, but will fill a currently vacant commercial space in the district and will not displace a tenant. The project will create new part-time and full-time employment opportunities. The project would not be expected to affect existing traffic patterns as the project site is well served by public transit lines. It will help contribute to the vitality of the overall neighborhood, and it meets applicable requirements of the planning code. This concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions.
Great, thank you. Project sponsor, please.
Commissioners, good afternoon. Philip Lesser, speaking on behalf of Cricket Wireless, Gig Telecommunications. Nancy Tran did a very good job encapsulating everything about this particular project. Just wanted to give you a little color commentary. I'm 4th generation Mission Merchants Association, currently president. Been on a lot of merchant walks. I've never been on one that had this kind of a love fest. We have Gerardo, who went to Balboa High. Sitting next to Gary, went to Galileo, Washington High. Basically, San Franciscans hanging out with one another. Nobody shook Gerardo's hand. They all hugged him. Well, that's the lady who does my mom's hair. Well, that's the guy who changes the oil in my car. You see we have over 70 letters of support in English, Spanish, and Cantonese. Represents the flavor of the neighborhood. This is a division of AT&T. Question I had for these gentlemen, I'm going to ask them to answer it for you. Why would AT&T create another division? Why does the world need Cricket Wireless? So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Gerardo and to Gary to answer that question for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. How you doing? Yeah, pretty much Cricket Wireless is a no contract. It's actually, we have really economic plans. It's really good for the neighborhood, especially because it's affordable for everyone. We don't really ask for social, none of that. People could just apply and get it. We have a great family saving plans as well, and it's really good plans overall for everyone to use. Pass it to Gary right now.
Okay, thank you.
And hi, yeah. So, in cricket, it's so I can say I'm really nervous. Yeah. So I think cricket is really fit for the neighborhood in the near the Excelsior community, and we don't need contract, and we don't need credit check. It's simple. People want the plan, they just come to the store and get the plan. Yeah, and yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any public comment on this particular item? Okay, not seeing any public comment is closed.
I think that was from the last one, but go ahead and sign.
My thing's dying. My screen's dead. Who's up first there?
So this is from the last one.
Yeah.
I'll talk. That sounds great.
Okay.
I'll talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, young men, for coming up and speaking. As I know sometimes it can be hard. Great job. I think that this fits. I don't see any particular issues here. I think this is warranted under the CU findings, and I'd like to make a motion to approve.
Second.
There's nothing further, Commissioners. There's a motion that has been seconded to approve this matter with conditions. On that motion, Commissioner Hillis.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Koppler.
Aye.
Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
And Commission President Fong.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes 5-0. And we are on the discretionary review calendar and your final item before 3 o'clock.
Oh my gosh.
Commissioner Koppler?
Commissioner
Must be your
Koppel,
doing.
you're a good luck charm.
Do not get used to this.
Item 16 for case number 2014-002562 DRP at 1883 Church Street, discretionary review. This may have come up so fast, staff may not even.
We're here.
We are.
Staff is here.
Okay.
Nobody's here.
Staff's ready.
I told you.
Good evening, Planning Commission. Delvin Washington, Southwest Team Leader. The subject property is located at 1883 Church Street. The proposal is to construct a 3-story horizontal addition at the rear of an existing single-family residence. This addition is to include a new deck in the rear and 2 new bathrooms and new bedroom. The subject property is a single-family residence, 1883 Church. It's located on the east side of Church between Randall and 30th Street in the Diamond Heights neighborhood. The surrounding area is primarily developed with single-family residences and is just south of the Upper Noe Rec Center. The discretionary review was filed by a neighbor who lives next door and to the south. They expressed concern about the design of the project, and believe the design conflicts with residential design guidelines and more cohesive building materials should be included. They would like to see the roof slope, top story, and a rear deck eliminated. The residential design team reviewed the plans and suggested changes to the project sponsor that were incorporated into the project. The RDT supports the rear deck and the depth of the addition, which will be set back 3 feet on the north and 3 feet 11 inches on the south, adjacent to the DR Filer's residence. The DR Filer's residence is not as deep as the subject property, but is to the south and on higher ground. The project does not contain nor create anything that is exceptional nor extraordinary, and the Planning Commission should not take discretionary review and approve the building permit as presented. That concludes my presentation.
DR requester?
Thank you. My name is Albert Camarina, 1889 Church Street. I'm here to ask that you uphold the DR for a few reasons. One is the general scale of the project. I think the introduction said it all. 3-story horizontal addition to a single-family home that basically goes back 33 feet. That includes 12 feet of deck and goes up 30 feet 9 inches. I feel that I've looked at the design, the RDG, specifically page 27, which shows various examples of allowable additions under the design guidelines, and I do not see anything within the RDG that this project resembles at all. I think the mass of the project is a bit overpowering for the location. I think it has serious impact on the mid-block open space, particularly for the residents on the southwest corner of the block. There's about 4 or 5 houses that basically are impacted that will lose any sight of greenery going down the sort of mid-block range between the two streets. I know that the sponsors have a desire to expand their home for their growing family. I don't disagree with that. I don't have a problem with them actually building a project. I just think that the scale is a bit much. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Sorry, speakers in support of the DR requester.
Good evening, Commissioners.
Sir, are you the project sponsor?
I am the project sponsor and the owner of the property.
Okay. Well, it doesn't appear to be any
Okay.
other speakers in support, so.
Project sponsor, please. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Adam Coburn, and along with my wife, Gina, and our 2 children, we're the owners of 1883 Church Street. We bought the house in 2009 knowing that this small house had a lot of potential. Given the lot size was large enough for an
Would you
addition.
speak into the microphone,
I'm
please?
sorry.
That would be better for all of us.
Was large enough for an addition whilst allowing for a very generous sized backyard. We made a lot of improvements to our backyard over the first year and provided a garden that our family have greatly enjoyed ever since. It's been our plan all along to extend our home footprint whilst retaining the outdoor space. This was especially needed after we had our twins, who are now 6 years old. We've always made these plans clear to our neighbours, including the DR requester and family. This modest addition would provide additional living space with minimal impact on the neighbours while making better use of the lot to allow for a better home for our family of 4. The extension would provide individual rooms for our children on the same floor, more comfortable living space for our family functions, and room for our parents and family to stay whilst visiting. The view of the front of the house is essentially unaffected, and the rear of the home would remain similar to others on the block. Over the years we have lived in our home, we have seen many developments. In addition, since we know many of our neighbours, we have been privy to many different home layouts on our block, which we considered during our design. This is, if we can have the overhead. Show correctly. This is a view of our block space, which shows our home. The light or the pink is 2-story homes, but the darker red is 3-story, and the very dark red is 4-story. So you can see that on our block there are many existing 3- and 4-story homes. We have done our due diligence in finding out what works and what does not work, and we felt our proposed project is our best foot forward in keeping within the character of the neighbourhood, whilst building a better home layout for our family. Our project is nothing outside what already exists in our neighbourhood. We kept our plans modest from the start whilst preserving the neighbourhood character at the forefront of our minds. We did not max out the building envelope potential. As you can see from the image showing our proposed plans, I think we have to do it that way. Okay. Our proposed plans versus what we, the potential plans. But we did not want that. We just wanted our home to meet our growing family needs. We spent a great deal of time trying to compromise with the DR requester, and we made several design changes to accommodate some of the concerns raised. This slide shows the attractive rear view of the proposed addition and indicates the design compromises we made to accommodate our neighbours' concerns. Notably, the generous setbacks we included in our original plans We moved our upper deck at the request of our northern neighbours, and we made changes to the deck railing, added frosted glass, and introduced the pitched roof. Unfortunately, we were unable to resolve all of the concerns that were raised because that would have resulted in a home that did not meet our family needs. We love the neighbourhood and our neighbours, and that our kids go to the local school. We feel very fortunate to live in such a great community. Additionally, we are happy to get support from many of our neighbours who think our project would be good for the neighbourhood. This image shows that support comes from many of our neighbours, 18 in total, who wrote letters of support that you will find in your DR supplement. It includes adjacent neighbours to the north and neighbours to the rear. Commissioners, we hope we have conveyed to you why you should approve this project.
Okay, thank you. Are there any speakers in support of the project sponsor? Okay.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name's Jason Mass. My wife, Ronnie Zuckerberg, and I live at 1867 Church Street, which is 4 houses to the north of Gina and Adam and their children. And all I can say is they've been great neighbors. But when it came time to do the renovation, we asked to have an actual walkthrough and look at the plans closely, which they very graciously allowed. They explained in detail what they plan to do. We feel in support of that. They're not greedy people. They just want some extra space so they can raise their family in a city that's becoming increasingly expensive and increasingly dense. We visited their home, as I say. Without that kind of in-person information and step-by-step walkthrough, we could not, in good conscience, support any project. One of the things that struck us so strongly about the project was its modesty, actually, certainly given what is legally allowed. We appreciated their lack of flamboyance and what has come to be routine inconsideration by builders. All you have to do is take a look at 4 houses to the north of where I am to see what happened to a small 1-story Victorian. It's now 4 floors, probably going to sell for $4 million. We've been living in our home for 37 years and are your basic fanatical lovers of San Francisco and its charm. So anything that comes in the way of approval regarding renovations demands clear-eyed evaluation to get our support. These are wonderful young people with young, cared-for children looking for some very reasonable additional breathing space. They've been extremely responsible. I believe they've lived at their current space for maybe 8 years, and they've been great neighbors. So my wife and I definitely support this. We don't feel it's going to impinge on the neighborhood. There are houses that are even taller than what they're proposing, and certainly deeper. So that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, DR requester, you have a 2-minute rebuttal.
Thank you. First, I'd like to disagree with the fact that the front view is not impacted by the math that is being built at the back. If you look at the house that is existing now, and my family's lived in our house since the late 60s, so we've seen many families raised throughout the neighborhood in much smaller homes. Basically, what's going on is that it's almost like they're building another house in back of the existing house. I think you could see by the drawing that it is that large. I'm not disputing that there's other 3-story, 2-story homes in the neighborhood, but I don't think they have the impact that this has on the particular corner of the neighborhood that it does. I do acknowledge that there are support letters, but if you see the vicinity of where the support comes from, none of the people that wrote letters are affected by this project in any way. Thank you.
Okay, project sponsor, you have a 2-minute rebuttal.
My wife commented as I was writing this presentation that I used the term growing family too many times. But really, Commissioners, that is the crux of it. We are a family who love living in San Francisco, and in particular our neighborhood. And we just need a little bit of additional space for our children. We don't need a mansion, nor do we desire one. We put forward modest plans that meet planning code and almost unanimously received explicit support from our neighbors. We did everything reasonably possible to address concerns raised by the DR filer throughout the process, meeting several times, communicating regularly, and making various design concessions, as noted earlier. We reviewed many alternative plans and gave them serious consideration, but unfortunately, at the end, despite addressing many of the issues the DR filer raised, the changes that the DR filer ultimately was insisting on would have resulted in a home that really did not and does not meet our family needs. I respectfully ask that in seeing our reasonable plans, you approve them and allow us to move forward in making a home for our family that we hope to enjoy for many years to come. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, public hearing is closed. Commissioner Moore.
Appreciates the department's active involvement in shaping the building. There is one issue, and that is something the Commission speaks about, myself leading the discussion, that's the issue of privacy in the rear of the property regarding the second-level deck, which extends to the full width of the building expansion. And since the building expansion overshoots the rear lines of all three properties, direct your attention to drawing A0.6. We'll have an issue of privacy with people on the deck of the second floor looking backwards on both sides into the adjoining buildings. The current condition, obviously, because the current building is shorter, there is no problem. But once you start to build an addition which overshoots the common demising lines plus the deck, that problem will be exacerbated. So I am in support of everything regarding the expansion. However, I will have to ask that we look at the width of the deck and pulling that in on both sides in order to avoid looking back into the other adjoining properties on both sides, that is 1879 as well as 1889. Are you following me on the drawing?
I am, Commissioner. I also you are aware there is currently the deck's going to be 3 feet on one side and 3 feet
That's
11
correct.
on the other sides. But in addition to that, you feel that there's some additional setback could be necessary for the deck.
It's particularly if you stand really on the deck over its entire width, which is 12 feet, you can very comfortably look from the second floor into windows, which are clearly illustrated in the rear elevations of the DR submittal in 3 dimension, but also on the side photos for the rear elevations. And I think we are very consistent in trying to avoid intrusion into intrusion of privacy on adjoining properties. So if we hold that back another foot from the edge of the expansion on either side, so that you can't look around the corner.
Are you saying holding it back 1 foot?
Whatever we feel that still makes a reasonable deck, a foot and a half on either side, yes. It's just basically reminding people that you can't stand at the railing and kind of look into your neighbor's windows.
Commissioner Johnson.
I disagree. I think that for one of the properties, you'd be looking onto their deck, and the other one, I'd be hard-pressed to think that pulling it back a moderate amount would impede someone who really had that intent. So I actually think that the project as designed works in terms of the pulling back. Normally for projects that are in zoning that could hold increased densification, like RH2H, RH3, I always ask for an additional unit, but in this case, it's a pretty moderate extension of a single-family home, and it's not, going to the entire buildable envelope. So I'd like to make a motion not to take DR and approve the project.
Second.
If there's nothing further, Commissioners, there's a motion that has been seconded to not take DR and approve the project as proposed. On that motion, Commissioner Hillis.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Koppler.
Aye.
Commissioner Moore.
No.
Commission President Fong.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes 4-1 with Commissioner Moore voting against. Commissioners, that will place us on general public comment, for which I have no speaker cards.
Okay, is there any general public comment this afternoon? Okay, not seeing any. The meeting is adjourned.